Welcome, everyone, to another project talk at CAELi, the Celestial Arts Education Library, and I am Jenn Zahrt, the founder and director of the Institute, and today I have the honor of introducing you to JD Kelley, the founder of Astro Magia Conference. Welcome.
Hello, thanks so much, Jen, for having me.
Thank
I
you
was
for
delighted,
taking the time to be here.
of course, I was delighted to have a time to chat about this stuff with
Yeah.
you.
So let's go back to the very beginning of the birth of this conference. What
Yeah.
inspired you to found this conference?
Yeah, well, I had been a practicing magician and astrologer for quite a long time, and also very interested in folk magic and witchcraft. Um, and that had been ongoing for many, many years. My interest in astrology had increased in probably starting in the mid like 2010s. I guess, like taking it more seriously, but I was always dabbling and very much involved. I was that kid that everybody went to know a little bit about their cards or their charts or whatever, as many of us were, or are. Um, and I think that as obviously the traditional revival, if we're talking about that revival of traditional astrology, um, as that sort of started to have like the influence that it was playing out, I think that astral magic became, for me at least, like a missing piece within at least within the more formal toolkit that I had as a practitioner. And however, I think for many of us that were really inclined early on to being exposed to astral magic, we we're already I would sorry if I swear, but I'll try my best not to, but we were already messing about, I've outused another word, messing about with astrology as it related, yeah, astrology as it related to magical practice. So that was already happening, prior to being exposed to things. And I think that when it became more formally, these are texts that are important to the practice and the history of Western esotericism, but also the history of magic, and of course with astrology, astromagic. Um, and then so many cool teachers, like Christopher Warnock doing what he was doing, early on. There were others, though, as well that were, and some of Chris's teachers, they didn't maybe formalize themselves as astral magicians as Chris Warnock did, but
Mhm.
they were messing about with it a bit, or they were interested in the textual aspect of it. Um, so anyway, as it was really with the Celestial Art, the publication of that anthology, and my already involvement in practicing astrological magic, that I realized, uh, there was enough people to buy an anthology of essays.
Mhm.
So there's got to be enough people and there was enough people to write an anthology of essays, which is like another interesting one, as you know. But the thing around it was that really clued me into the fact that it was ripe, the moment for something that could be supportive of the discourse around it. It was the right moment. The other collision around it, just to finish the question, was that I um, was had recently moved to Edinburgh in 2017, um, and uh, was for the first time in proximity to a association, an astrological association here, which I'm the chairman of the Scottish Astrological Association. I've been their chairman for going on 3 years now. It's time for me to exit. But the point really being is that I loved that sense of community passion around a topic. So
Mhm.
I wanted to, these two things kind of came together. It's time for a conference that can focus on astrological magic and a bigger idea, which I'm sure we can talk about, but a bigger way of approaching that as well. And I always thought, even back in 2017, 18, that it would need to be online
Mhm,
because it is a niche enough community that, um, and also the overhead so big, climate stuff is also a factor for many people now. And, but there's more to say about that, I would think an in-person hybrid conference should happen like every 5 years, which is what
mhm.
I wanted as part of the model. So that'll come hopefully in 2025.
I love that. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I would love it maybe if you had it here, but,
I think it's a great spot to have it. I mean, the conference itself, like we had to choose like a time anchor, if you
Mhm.
will. And, I chose the East Coast because I lived on the East Coast when I lived in Florida. And it was kind of like middle enough. But I think with the in person or hybrid aspect of it, it could totally be out your way. That would be awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I love also the in-person community of the astrological community mixed
Yes.
with Austin Coppock's anthology, The Celestial Art. And I was around him when he was compiling that anthology before it got into print, and his intentions with that of trying to be the vanguard of showing occultists how vital astrology can be to doing
Exactly.
magic and how much it had been overlooked, and yet in the tradition there is this humongous um like love. I'm going to say throbbing. There's just this very vital concept of,
Yeah,
when you bring astrology
yeah,
into the magical mix, it amplifies everything.
I agree. I agree, and I think that, when I had to write some things to sort of explain some of my ideas around it, I thought that, to me, um, the in involving astral magic as part of the work of being an astrologer, which I'm not saying that is true for every astrologer. Like
Mhm,
I think would be silly. But for me, it's a natural relationship. I think it takes something. It's what I've described in the past, saying that just like observational astronomy
mhm,
is a missing piece to like involving us in like a kind of observational astrology, and how that is all, and that was always very important in my astrological work.
mhm,
I've owned a telescope since I was a little boy, and I still own one, and have many, many ways of looking very precisely at the sky, out and about with the sky. Um, but point being is that just like observational astronomy adds this element that I think is really missing, takes us away from the representation of the sky to an encounter with the sky. I think that astrological magic moves us away from concept to participation or encounter. And I
mhm,
think this is a really important thing to think about, just like we are changed by offering consultations, for example, as astrologers. It's a conceptual, now applied type thing. It's similar in that way,
mhm,
but adds this other very different dimension I really think is like akin to me at least the observational astrology being like a missing piece within the my work,
mhm. So now that the
Yeah.
conference has happened a number of times and it's about to happen again this
Mhm.
November,
Yeah.
have
Yeah,
you
November
s
16th to 18th.
have you
Exactly.
seen these, presentations produce the encounters you'd been hoping for?
I think that the real point of the conference maybe was more, and that is a missing piece around it. In 2019, I attended the Trans States Conference here in the UK, which is a really amazing conference. If Trans States is an esoteric focused conference that I presented at the last time it happened, but originally attended, and what they did was they brought together on an equal footing to an extent, the most that an academic setting can do it, which I think is there's some limitations that they might have, but they really tried, and I think did and have done an amazing job of bringing together what I would call creatives, academics, and practitioners. all right, around an esoteric subject and or focus, if you will. And um, it was also that really influenced the shape that Astro Magia took. For me, it needed to do this, and because I wasn't really bound by any sort of institutional thing, I was kind of creating something fresh or whatever from I could try my best to actually bring that level field, if you
Mhm,
will,
mhm,
and then also honor the mixing of that, because like for yourself, for example, having been involved, you have a very strong academic training and background, but you also are a practicing astrologer and astro magician, right? So then it's not trying to pigeonhole you into any particular, but giving enough space for those groups to be together. And I think the other thing around it is that um, I, and maybe this is the wrong language. I'm always trying to find the right language to describe what's going on there. But I say astral magic and its contents. And the reason I say and its contents, which maybe is the wrong, and actually lately I've said contents and context,
mhm,
because the thing is that it is a something that is quite specific that is occurring within something that is broader. And I think that trying to make it so that it's not having a hyper focus on Western astrological magic exclusively, it
mhm,
allows this broader uh, experience of the discourse to kind of be there. So to
mhm.
me, because my original background is in anthropology and then education, I think that this is like an important piece. It's like wanting to so really I think if it relates to the encounter participatory part, there was this idea to make the discourse bigger so that
Mhm,
more people are able to be exposed to this material and they're practitioners of and all of that. And in that way, I do hope that people are messing about with, the things that they learned during the conference. But I'm sure it's varied. I'm sure I think for some, it gives them a place they really feel like they have a home to uh, center discourse that's important for them or practices that are important for them. I've gotten that a lot from the contributors, and people that attended.
Yeah, I mean, in that inviting practitioners, artisans, astrologers, academic inclined people, it's that word you used, home, is an acceptance of the fullness of one's pursuit of knowledge, not just acknowledging a limited consensus-based 19th century Germanic university style academic
Right.
qualification of it, right? And as someone who has a
Fair
PhD in
analysis.
German, it's like I remember sitting there when they're sort of like, "Oh yeah, the world's university models are all based off of Alexander von Humboldt," and there it is, and you're like, there's more ways to know. I literally know more ways to know. As somebody who is currently a closeted astrologer in the PhD program, I was forced to not
Mhm.
reveal all the ways I knew how to know, and made that
Yeah.
a problematic of my thesis anyway, as a challenge of we have to create spaces of investigating these
Mhm.
phenomena that are inclusive, and that's what you've done with Astromagia, is a
Thank you. I
conversation
try.
in an inclusiveness of also the definitions of what is astrological magic. It's not just scholastic image magic as practiced in Europe in the 1500s. It's bigger than
No,
that, it's
definitely.
cross-cultural.
Yes. And I think that, again, I get why it is you can see it's like somebody who has a focus in anthropology having kind of like a hand in it, um not that it's probably in many ways outside of my own studies and exploration, which is always there in my work that I do uh personally. But I think that outside of that, the shape of the conference is very much influenced by my desire to allow it to almost be like a cultural encounter at that moment, um, And I think too, having a theme, which this year is about the corporeal, the erotic, and also the material aspect of what the practices involve. I think having some themes, not that we are going to exhaust the theme, because that's
Mhm.
what I realized when we had the conference that focused on story and sky dynamics. It's not done. We're not, you know what I mean? But it is
Yeah.
one of those things where having a little bit of a focus does expand or grow it there. And I think that, we all know, especially those of us that are uh what's the phrase that gets used, like jobbing astrologers, or we work as astrologers and
Mhm.
even work as astro magicians, like myself. um, I think that there is a stress that I understand people are put under when there are these dynamics, and I can feel that stress, many others can. But the whole point of the conference was really to try to create a context that could grow the interest, because we don't know how long. I mean, it might last for a very long time that people are very interested and invested in these ideas. But if there's not a context to sort of nurture them, and not that there aren't, there are, but it was a particular one that I felt was lacking.
Yeah.
And also that with I am, the association, as I always said from the beginning, I wanted the conference to facilitate the birth of an association
Mhm.
that could be focused on this subject as well, because it deserves it. It
Mhm.
does. That's not my, like, it might be like a little child that I've been involved with, but it should go off and live its own life. Do you know what I mean? It's not for me to be in charge of the International Association of Astral Magic forever. It was just the idea of setting it up. It would kind of spawn, or spin off or emerge from it, because I really want people to also have that ongoing, like I did with the SAA, like
Mhm.
I have with that, and, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things I see it again, across the board where it's like our generation in founding these points of encounter, these points of transmission are
Mhm.
doing things differently than the if I can lump people into a little category, the Pluto and Leo generation who are still in charge of what they created. And then when
Mhm.
they leave the planet, that entity does not make it past their vision of what it was. And
Yes.
you've created two things, Astro Magia and I am in this sense of like trying to already overcome founder syndrome before it's even established,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. I
And
want
like
that show to be over.
yeah, yeah, and we have that in common with the CAELi Institute of like, yes, I founded this library, but I want it to be around well past my death and have, stewards of this collection to deepen it and expand it and provide,
Yes.
an institutional context where like your conference, there's this acknowledgement of an insider slash emic perspective alongside an outsider or secondary source edic
Yep.
kind of vantage point, and also teasing out how can you evaluate something like astrological magic truly in the same quality, having not tried to engage with it on any level? Like, how
Yeah.
is that a
Yeah.
true exploration of that way of knowing?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I also think, we all become, magic also magical practice has a lot to do with, in my opinion, with aesthetics. We have aesthetics that we appreciate, and that will even come down to I mean, I'm not trying to make some grand theory about it. It's just that the idea that some of us get very attached to our method and our approach, our sources, our intimacy with which we have the gnosis from the encounters that are ongoing. But I was saying to someone the other day, that was presenting for the SAA, I cannot separate my understanding of something like Pisces from my encounters, for example, that I've had. with Venus and Pisces and many, many times. Yeah, I mean, doing talismanic projects with Venus and Pisces, the recent Jupiter time in Pisces, Neptune being in Pisces, but talismanic process that I've engaged in, because those workings do bring you into something. You know what I mean? And I think that's the thing, you're brought into a process. And this processual nature of what practice is a very tricky thing for people to uh, speak to critically, speak to in a way that is open. You know, it's easier to focus on text
Mhm.
because text is something we can kind of start to get our hands around. You know what I mean? Or our head around a little bit. In a more graspy sort of way. Whereas experiential, processual, participatory stuff is or content is very much um, has to be explored in a very different way. And I think that this is the idea was never to exclude a focus on textual or electional or source material or anything like that. And as if anyone who's ever looked at any of the program for Astro Magia knows that, do you know what I mean, can
Mhm.
see that thing. But this other piece around the encounter, how it changes you, the processual, the Gnostic, the whatever, piece of that, the Gnosis part of it, really not the Gnostic, but the Gnosis part of it, all of that, it's a context where we can talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, and acknowledge it, and it's a verbal transmission, not a textual one, and,
It is.
like many conferences that have proceedings, Astro Magia resists being textualized, right?
It does. It does.
Do you think that its hesitance to become a book or produce a single anthology of each year's, meeting rests on the tradition of even, to name just one thread, the way
Okay.
that Rosicrucian texts share certain things and obscure others. And
Mm.
that obscuration through text is actually a I need to reveal but conceal and conceal more than I'm revealing, but if you know, you know. But that also means that you probably didn't get it from this book directly, and on and on. It's this kind of anti-text in a way, right?
It could be. It could be. I think that maybe I've sat with it for a while, even when the attempts were made. I think it has more of a Jupiterian quality to it. The conference itself, I think it resists being pinned down into text
Mhm,
because at the moment, it's not mature enough to do that.
mhm,
I think when Astromagia kind of comes into its maturity, it will produce something that is probably textual, as would happen. But I think that there's something there around that because I do think Jupiter is very much tied to publication
mhm,
and those things. But Mercury is also, very much tied to publication and those things. And I think that its birth, its various influences personally that have affected me to do the work that I'm doing, I think some of it is that. So it's a slower process. You know what I mean? It's not something that it might be like a 12-year cycle or something like that. I don't know. I don't
yeah,
know. But something could happen with that eventually. But I do think you're on to something around the idea around um, it's like, for example, this could have been a back and forth writing project that you and I were doing, but
mhm,
we've chosen that the right, or you've chosen, that the right context for it is like as it is, where it's
mhm,
a spoken interaction. Um, and I think that you're right to an extent. It's almost like the conferences are an anthology of videos related to a focus. Do you know what I mean? So every year the video libraries are still kept intact. for those that wanted, and we're definitely, it's not like massive trying to make a lot of money off of that. It's more something that keeps the lights on kind of thing for the conference expenses, if you will, throughout the year.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and
yeah,
there
anthologies.
yeah, well, video anthology and also the oral transmission versus what happens when you take even a transcription of something that's shared with tone of voice and affect and perhaps image, and then come like bring it into this immortal textual state, right?
Yeah,
Because there is a kind of
yeah,
perhaps there's now with eventually, I don't know if video is going to be around forever ever, but texts is a technology that survives a lot of things on the planet, right?
it does. It
And
does.
video less so, and then but
Definitely.
historically humans have communicated not textually. We have a whole entire thousands of hundreds of thousands of years of prehistory that come before textual encounter, right? So it's
Totally.
kind of thinking about
Vital. And
the
there are many groups that contemporarily that is ongoing for them.
yeah.
Carry on though. I'm just
Oh,
saying.
just thinking about the value judgment around what counts as transmission, because academics want a source to cite, which then says the logos is the primary method by way we can
Yeah.
convey meaning and knowledge. And when you're talking about something like astrological magic, there's a whole other level of communication, not only in the, hey guys, look what I've done, but also in the data that you're working with in a chart that is not
Yeah.
necessarily citable in the same way unless you already know how to practice it.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think that it is, obviously the textual tradition is vital within, I mean, again, maybe part of my thought process around this always brings in the fact that here in the UK, there's a lot of, where I live, there's a lot of my older astrology pals, if you will.
Mhm,
They pursued and have pursued degrees in skyscape archaeology as astrologers. They're interested in doing that work as astrologers, and I think that um, part of this as well is like the way in which knowledge is held within the world is diverse. We are, again, my training in education is very was very obvious that we spend a lot of time getting people, and David Abrams and many others have talked about this extensively, but have kind of made a focus on this line of text that we're as away from the fully embodied experiential way of encountering the world as something we indoctrinate. And I don't mean that in like a ooh indoctrination, but indoctrinate as a thing that happens amongst in an educational context. um a lot of effort is put into indoctrinating uh many people within a Western context or a modern Western context into um developing this kind of ability to read.
mhm,
And I think that even charts, like we know as astrologers, like when you have this like global awareness of a chart, you know what I mean? You're sort of taking something that can't be just looked at in a like a super linear fashion or read in a linear fashion. It might go point to point to point, or something, is happening in the reading of it.
mhm,
But similarly, the sky world, if you will, and the way that sky and land are interacting with each other, very particular to every place.
mhm,
Um, and let's say the also we include the weather, because that's probably an important factor in all of this. This is why most of my inclinations personally are towards at least recovering or imagining or reimagining or whatever sorry, whatever word we want to use to describe a animist astrology. And I think there are many animist astrologies, out
mhm.
there. Just
Yeah.
more my personal work with Cunning as Folk, the work that I'm doing personally, on my website, cunningasfolk.com, but also um, in the discourse that I'm trying to nurture from like as a more I'm also contributing something outside of the outside of that. Um so yeah, I do think you're definitely right. It's like a total different facility of human capacity
Mhm.
that is very present within us. Most people who engage in this material know that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's
but
a when
it's
you say
easier to
that,
focus
most
on
people who
text.
engage with this material know that, then yeah, exactly it. There's not time spent debating whether or not it's real or worthy of being investigated or evaluated or examined, and that
Mhm.
defensiveness that a lot of times when anything astrological hits academics, there's this kind of,
Yeah,
"Ooh, you believe in that?" or "That's pseudoscience," or "It's not scientific enough to be studied in any way." Like, okay, but it's not supposed to be science. It doesn't try to be that. It's astrology.
yeah,
And when you come and create Astro Magia and along the axis of magic as well, and all of its various interpretations and practices, we move beyond the defensiveness of trying to prove our validity of getting to speak, just to speaking and having the
yeah.
conversations.
I agree. So I think you're onto something there, like around it. I think that's a really important, but I think, and why I relate it to a Mercury Jupiter thing that is happening. I work a lot with those gods, if you will. And like I think that um a lot of my personal work again has been around exploring how we can put gods into different relationships through astral phenomena, through encounter with astrological magic, but also through some very basic stuff that is fundamental to the shape that Western astrology takes.
Mhm,
That these points of contact are held in opposition to one another, for example. Um, but they share very similar significations related to friendship, related to coming together to do something about something. They are the two God, whatever we want to call God forms that hold the mutable signs. You know what I mean?
mhm.
They're responsible for all the mutability in astrology. So I
That's
mean, not
true.
yeah,
At least
it's
by
very true.
rulership.
I get it. I'm trying to say we can drill it down to
Yeah.
something like this. Um, but my point really was around the fact that I do think Jupiter, while it is a form that wants to, yeah, capture something, I think it comes through in the encounter, and the truth is revealed through that.
Mhm,
That to me is a Jupiterian truth. Do you know what I mean? A Mercurial truth is not that it has no interest in experience, because that would be ridiculous. Because again, we are with that shared space. But it is interested in how we could take that and put some words to it. You know what I mean? In my opinion.
mhm.
Um, and be precise even and still do all the amazing things that Mercury does, which is hide something. Do you know what I
In
mean?
plain sight, right? In a footnote.
Plain sight with the word, do you know what I mean? So written down.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, yeah, to me it still kind of relates to that. At least that's what I see around it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and then things happen in the transmission, the live transmission in the conference context that
Yeah.
do in my observation of how it's gone in the last 2 encounters,
Mhm.
it's pushed things forward, and it itself might not have produced a book, but books have come out of it.
That's true. You mentioned that in our little chat prior, and I think that that is a really important thing because and why I would say again it has a Jupiterian quality, at least from my devotion to making it a thing,
Mhm,
is has a lot to do with the fact that it's it is wanting to center a part of centering it is the people that are sharing their experience, material, work, uh, all of that. I want people that are contributing to go off and do amazing stuff from the context that I'm trying to hold, for them to do something with the ideas that they have. And if they want to go off and they do something with that, that makes me very happy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want that.
Yeah. In the context of you've created through the conference identity, because a presenter at the conference then is still at the conference when the conference isn't happening anymore, almost in anticipation
Yeah.
of the next one. But I've seen so many colleagues continue to work in that
Yeah.
identity silo of, I presented at Astro Magia, now I'm going to continue doing this work in the home that you've made for that mixing of identities as practitioner and investigator researcher, and someone who's kind of creating in a, if we're going to go back to that word animist, like a living engagement with the
Mhm.
material that is
Yeah.
transcending. I'm thinking of Kristen Mathis, for example, in the Orphic hymns, right? And not creating, when I say the word new, it's not like new, but it's this like
Yeah.
what's happening now. It's an update of the Orphic hymns in the
Exactly.
context of
Exactly.
their lived experience, and this kind of yeah, I guess like giving attention and life to something in ways that are pertaining to the now here, and not necessarily
Yeah.
reviving a tradition just because you know
No, no, and there's room for people that might approach it as revivalism. When I look at it, I said this in the last conference in the opening remarks around it. When I look at something like the Picatrix as a text, I cannot not it's difficult for me to not see the syncretic uh lovely mess that it is of influences. Do you know what I mean? Because you can't not see that in a text like that, in
hmm
my opinion. Um, so I think that even from a textual perspective, uh, some of the things are considered texts of the Western astrological magical tradition, to give it like lots of adjectives. But the point really is that uh, it needs to be able to have a lot of influences shown all at once. It needs to be able to be exactly, and why I would again say that to me as a Jupiterian move, in my opinion, is to allow enough space for like all of this to occur so that there is some kind of thing cohering,
hmm
but it is not by the discourse having to be identical that we then
hmm
are cohering it. And it's
right.
also adding all these pieces that are very difficult to talk about, or they have to be experienced. Do you know what I mean? Like an art performance. You know
hmm
what I mean? That's why I think inevitably going forward in 2025, I want there to be an aspect. It might be shaped a little differently. The conference, I have ideas around that, but I want it to include for those that would like to have an encounter with one
hmm
another, where we do something, together.
hmm
Um, and to me, Jupiter in Cancer is a perfect time to do it. I have big thoughts around that already for my personal astrological magic engagements, that are in the works. But for Astro Magia, I think it would be glorious to kind of come together and mess about, with
yeah.
this, have an experience together, you know?
Right. Yeah, when you say I didn't realize Jupiter was that close to being in Cancer, but every time it's
Coming.
been in the end of Cancer in my life, I've been in the middle of a massive flood. So I'm thinking, one of the themes could be open the
Maybe we
floodgates.
don't come near to Jen. No, I'm just
No, no, just don't do it at the end of the sign. Um,
I won't. I won't wait till the end.
but yeah, and the live experience, which hasn't happened yet,
Yeah,
could, I mean, my experience of astrological conferences, a lot of things happen in the intertexts of the
yeah,
presentations, and that
totally.
then becomes a galvanizing thing for the future of the field, because that
Mm,
connection and that relationship and those intimacies that get built in between the moment when everyone's quiet and watching the presenter, they end up having a huge impact on even people getting married and like living their lives together, and just having these like intense friendships, and world trips get born
totally.
from that. So That would be really fun to see take place. And something I
Would
want
be.
to name that you're picking up on, or that you've articulated a little bit by saying something about skyscape
Mhm.
archaeology,
Yeah.
that is not a classical, like, if someone's thinking of themselves as an astrologer who reads charts, that's a wholly different field. But in the term of celestial art, it's contained. And you've
Yeah.
mentioned weather, and Nick
Mhm.
Campion has shown in the history of astrology there are cosmic astrologies that have a mathematical
Mhm.
regularity and symmetry to them, and then there
Yeah.
are chaotic astrologies that do think about things
Mhm.
like the influence of
Yeah.
weather and whether or not you can see
Yeah.
something in the sky, and how clouds and other patterns of
Yeah.
meteorology have an impact on the magic, right?
Totally. Totally. Well, one is more, in my opinion, without labeling it as he does, but I do think as categories are really interesting, is that when you actually look at the sky, you can't, you know, uh, what astronomers want for sky conditions is very particular because they have a objective that they're interested in. Most people I know that are astronomers look more at screens than they do at the actual thing, you know.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, so I think similarly, the mathematical aspect, not again to make it like math evil and like using using this as a technological piece evil, because I think that's ridiculous. Like people, I just was working through uh, and it's a really easy read if you haven't read it yet. But The First Astronomers by Dwayne, I forgot his last name now, but The First Astronomers, just finished that book. You do see where it's a focus uh, on indigenous astronomy coming from like an encounter with someone that is very familiar with the cultural aspects of astronomy as well as the scientific focus in astronomy,
Mhm,
working with elders within those traditions that are talking about their sky knowledge. And
mhm,
I think that within that you always see like the atmospheric conditions are vital to uh, understanding the ongoing living world that you are embedded within. And so, what I would say is that the history of Western astrology I do think becomes increasingly more and more devoted to a particular kind of technology that
mhm,
is about like now we're all very invested in charts and the math that would support a chart as it is related to observation and ongoing cycles, right, and changes that are there can be observed as well, right,
right.
and predict observation but
Possible
don't.
observation based off of a mathematical prediction of location, but not
to
necessarily actual observation.
No, 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 no. And if you've ever do it with Mercury. Mercury's a
Yeah.
great example. Try to see if you can actually see Mercury ever. Do you know what I mean? Because chances are you're too lazy to get up that early. Do you know
And
what
you
I
will
mean?
never see it at
Or
midnight. How many people know that? You will never see Mercury at midnight.
you damn sure won't see it. Well, I mean, maybe there's somewhere in the world, but I don't think
Oh,
that's
yes.
possible.
Okay, let's talk about polar locations, but that would be
Maybe,
perhaps the
maybe
only
there's
place.
somewhere. But I don't know what you'd get with the so anyway, when you try to actually, as you're pointing out, go out and look for the thing, I mean, also, typical ideas around and it's there in the tradition in all different kinds of ways, but how close planets can get to the sun without being affected. We're
Mhm,
talking about like more of a consideration that
mhm,
we're making is really interesting when you add location. Do you know what I mean?
mhm,
Because sometimes it is still possible to see a planet that's quite close to the sun in its own light, because of your local conditions that you are
mhm,
in, where you are on the globe, uh, the sky dance that is happening for you.
right.
Um, I think there's, and again, it's not a bad thing. Always these mathematical understandings have been really important historically, contemporarily in engagement with the sky.
Mhm,
Um, that goes way further back than I think most of us want to actually recognize. Sometimes I think people that have uh, knowledge of those traditions around the world, it's very clear. They were very clear about the fact that human beings have used maths as a way of understanding dynamics for a really long time. But
mhm,
I think our dependency as modern people on screens, do you know what I mean? On looking at things like on paper, I mean, is very particular, and we don't know that.
mhm. Or yeah, yeah, it's just taken for granted. I recently met a woman named Emily Levesque who wrote a book called The Last Stargazers, which was about the moment in the history of the practice of astronomy when they stopped making photographs of stars and comparing them, and they moved to the
Mm,
mathematical data, which can be backtracked and produce an image like the black hole. The image that we have
right.
of a black hole was calibrated through data with 3 different teams operating in total isolation. That was their way
Mm,
of checking, like, we're all working with this same data, can we create the same picture out of it? And that became the picture that we
interesting.
see of this black hole. But they're not looking at a photograph of a black hole. Like the idea that a
No.
photo is, or even just these X-ray negative things that we can try to see,
Yeah.
there's a moment in the imaging of astronomy that shifted at a certain point, even from
Mhm.
these
That makes
telescopes
sense.
creating plates of the data. So I
Mhm.
thought that was interesting. You're reading about first astronomers. I'm reading about last stargazers. Um,
Yeah, no, it is.
so
It's a really good way of understanding it. I think, I once was at an event that I helped organize. Amazing sky watching conditions, summery time here. Stars were significant, and glorious in the sky. Um, I was compelled to talk about the storying of the sky. Do you know what I mean? Because that's a topic of interest, and the way in which it is a place for holding knowledge. You know what I mean? Because this is the thing is, again, when we think about ways that knowledge is held that is not so dependent on textual technology,
mhm,
it is about other ways of holding knowledge. Not the phone's going to hold it for me, not the book's going to hold it for me, the laptop's going to hold it for me. It's about relationships of
mhm,
other kinds. And I think that it was sad to me. There was a woman there that was a scientist, not to like point weird fingers at scientists, but at a magical context event, an
mhm.
event is happening under a magical context. I was talking about this sky storying thing, storing the sky, holding knowledge thing. Uh, the comments that this scientist made was it's great that we have the data that they had, because like when we're talking about the ancient observational work that was done, we don't care about the stories, the meanings. We don't care about the way in which things are um, interpreted, or known, but they're really interested in the fact that someone in the ancient world wrote down things that are data driven and
Mm,
actually saw that as being the value in that. Do you know what I mean? And it just speaks to something you mentioned earlier about the worldview piece that is kind of there that it will obscure things around it. Anthropology, one thing that it does, it will definitely up your idea that you could ever have like a stable, held worldview that is for everyone. And it cracks open a lot of that. And so for me, I didn't go at this scientist, but I did say that's so sad.
yeah, there's a lot of beauty in this fictional component, you're right, which maybe not even be fiction, actually. Like they might be throwing away data about the story. in the
That's what
midst of
comes
trying
up.
to say, "Oh, I need to have this
Exactly.
mathematical piece," and it's like, yeah, but the value of the verbs and adjectives and the interpretation
Totally.
actually carries a whole nother valence. Like
You're right.
the bearded moon of Babylon, right? When they're doing the Enuma Anu and Lil and they say the moon has
Yeah.
a beard. I'm like, yes, moon, get it.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
we
Well,
don't have bearded
that makes
moons in astrology. Like, I feel like modern psychological, for example, or like,
yes.
anything modern we can do, unless we're actually looking at this moon, we can't tell whether or not it has a beard.
Totally. Totally, unless you're looking, you won't know, does the moon have a
But they
beard?
weren't trying to
Uh,
predict beards, they were recording them. It was an empirical
of
observation over
course.
700 years, like, "Oh, the moon has a beard tonight. It doesn't have a beard now. Now it's sideways. Now it looks like a leopard's eye." What? You
Yeah,
know?
totally.
So,
Well, I love the Babylonian, material. I am obsessed with it, and I think if I could do something really big academically, it would totally focus very deeply on that material because I think it offers a very different way of knowing the heavens. Um, and the interpretive pieces are really fascinating. I think there's an elasticity within the way
mhm,
that they worked with the observational aspect that creates such an like an elastic semiotics, if you will, where they can mean all different kinds of things. But
mhm,
the thing you hit on there as well is around exactly what comes up in the book, like the first astronomers, where language by indigenous knowledge holders of the sky is used to be a sort of empirical way of talking about something, and the way it's interpreted meteorologically or ritualistically or symbolically is uh, is there within the language that is used around it. It's not, oh, they recorded some numbers only, and
mhm.
therefore it's relevant, you know what I mean? But this other stuff's not. So I think that you're totally on to that, around it. It's vital to I think it and it's not for everyone. I think that a lot of times, like, I might speak about my opinion or thought or experience of something, and maybe some people don't recognize that I know that is just a fucking an opinion, excuse
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
But, I definitely know that. Yeah, I mean, it's just an opinion.
Well, I love your openness because it comes through in how the conference is experienced from the outside in and even the inside out as someone partaking, and also the way in which, if anthropology as a field is going to crack open your worldview and show you that you're
Yeah.
never really going to settle on one. From
Yeah.
my vantage point as someone holding space for the history and philosophy and practice of astrology, I've actually started people keep asking me like, "What kind of astrologer are you?" And I'm like, stereoscopic or omniscopic. Like I notice and acknowledge many astrologies that might not even be cosmically astrological in the way that people who are in a non-informed state think it's just a horoscope in the newspaper, for example, or even people who are
Yeah.
just beginning think it's, got this certain, oh, you need an ephemeris and you need this. And it's like, well, that's now how we do it, but in Babylon they were going up on the ziggurat and taking information down. um
Yeah.
so it's
As
like the
you
the
do.
multiplicity of the practices. It's like, how many astrologies are there? Well, how many belly buttons are there, and have there been, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
just and having that appreciation. Now I will there are some, like standpoints where I'm just like, why would you do that if you're trying to
I
do
get it.
a
I
certain
get it.
practice? But but also
Totally get
acknowledging
it.
like, well, I don't do that. You can do whatever you want. I'm doing this way.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the SAA hosting talks for the SAA over the last many years has really helped me, and as well as Astro Magia has really helped me to practice exactly what you said without, because if I go at it with natural level of inquisitiveness and curiosity, I'm not dependent immediately on validate and invalidate. And this is a huge part of like my personal work around decolonization, but also around just personal engagement with others. It's if we go into encounters with curiosity, it's very different than if we're already saying, yeah, that's not a thing, or that's a thing. It's a very different mode that you are in. And so I think, there are many people that present that might not be my aesthetics or style or approach or focus, or I may not care that much about that particular piece in a deep, passionate way, you
Mhm,
know, but I am really glad that they do. Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that they do
mm,
because that's something that they are invested in and focused on. And so, yeah, with amongst just for the SAA, just hosting modern astrologer of a very psychological bent, I can see something so much value in what they
mhm,
share and their process and exploration. Very traditional. Let's take a temperament analysis. Love it. Can be supportive of their focus. So I think you're right. It is trying to be curious, right? And then,
mhm, mhm. Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Have you noticed the community, change now that you've had the conference a couple of times?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that it was a little daunting to because my focus again has been more around the topic, and
Mhm,
then the idea that if I held certain values in place around how I did that, it would naturally be okay. And I have to trust that that can be kind of true to an extent, because I think, as I said prior in our chat, the desire we do get territorial. People become very territorial about topics, and I understand why that happens. But it's not my style or approach, around stuff. Yeah, if you want to come cook in my kitchen, I might struggle to, like, totally relinquish, control over how you are in my kitchen? But to me, that's not true of something like a subject.
mhm.
You know?
Yeah.
I just don't relate to that. So if anything, I do hope that that's something that Astro Magia is able to do, is, like, say, yeah, it's fine to be territorial, but at the same time, it's not really that cool if you're gonna obstruct, like, other people's engagement with it, because some of that stuff I always noticed in some of the more actual anthropology that I wrote, ethnographic work that I did. I noticed that generational transmissions and generational engagements are very tricky,
Mm,
and there's a lot of like total deny and dash and destroy, like what has been done before in a lot of the Western practice around things, and reinvent and focus and, now be obliterated by the next generation that comes in. I mean, and this plays out in subtle ways, right? So I think some of it, you do see the people that are, I want Astromagia to be an engagement of all things, not like, oh, it's one generation's thing. But if
mhm,
somebody does say, oh, that generation of, not that you did this, but I've heard people actually do this, like they are, the gen, like this generation, they're crap at like basically doing magic,
mhm.
of its ilk. I don't think that's very like, that could be a good criticism maybe if it had some particulars attached to it, but I don't think as like a blanket statement is great. So I hope that what people can feel from Astromagia is more of a, there's a bit of space for a lot of difference, and that's good, not a bad thing. So maybe
Yeah.
that would be the effect for the community, if I
Mhm,
could really label one. I think, has yet to reveal its full capacity to do the community piece that is
mhm,
there, but it's happening. And we have a talk tomorrow with that is focused on some of the Jyotish ideas that we could maybe think around the eclipses,
mhm,
and that's open to everybody. So if you go to astromagia.org, you'll see the upcoming talk. The link is there. It's, if you remember, you get access to the library. But if you're, wanting to attend, that would be great.
Very
tomorrow,
cool.
but
Yeah.
yeah. So the
Does
live event is always open to everybody,
Oh, that's lovely, I didn't know that.
right?
How can people find you said astromagia.org to purchase a ticket for the conference on November 16th through the 18th, yes?
That's right. Yes. Uh-huh. Yep.
And
For astromagia.org is pretty much where all this stuff is held right now. I think IAM will have its own website eventually, but
mhm,
it's easier to not have the overhead of it,
right.
of it there immediately. So it gives it a little space. But yeah, come, for those of you that can tomorrow with Priya Kale, uh, looking at Vedic mantras as eclipse remediation.
Mhm,
That's tomorrow. Always, they're all open to everyone to attend the live events. And then for the conference, it's there. Um, if people, are interested in presenting, sharing stuff.
mhm,
Next year's conference, we will have more of a focus on discourse, the textual aspects of things, collaboration, the social side of what it means to be involved in astral magic. It was going to have. I'm working to have it be multilingual for next year. And
wow.
so we'll have at least Italian, Spanish, and English, I'm thinking. So yeah, so people that are interested in stuff next year is already happening.
That's amazing, I love it.
Whatever. Yeah.
I love that you're
Yes.
already planning the next one while the first one is a month away, and, yeah, it reminds me of in publishing when you're doing a journal, like, the second you send off the one to print, you're already, like, halfway through creating the 2nd issue and the 3rd issue, so
Yeah. Yeah, and I want
yeah.
people to feel the enthusiasm if they're interested. So like there's a lot of really interesting people that are interested in the focus that will come for next year. I've already spoken to.
Mm,
Um and it's just paying attention, I think, to what's happening around it and trying to be engaged with it as best I can.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think that the only other thing I was gonna say, I love that the institute is called CAELi because do you know what that word means here where I live in Scotland?
No?
A CAELi is a party that you have that particularly involves a lot of dancing together. And it's usually you go to the CAELi, it's like a really amazing raucous dance party of like traditional dance and music. So
Wow.
and there are also people named Kaylee over here. So
Yeah.
then but you go to a Kaylee. So, I'm really also very excited having been a librarian for the SAA that
Mhm,
then we transitioned no longer having a physical collection anymore and worked with other libraries that are holding that content to like have it and hold it. I think that the work you're doing around that and like the context you're creating more of a educational aspect to things is also something I'm super stoked about and really, really thank you for what you're up to.
thank you, thank you. I love how your conference and this library and space are both creating ways for us to engage where we can get straight to the heart of our fields and furthering what we are doing without that defensive kind of having to justify why and be in this
Exactly.
like classically academic mode of you know I don't know, just fighting that demon. Like, I'm tired, I just want to get straight to it and be in a place that has the sources so you can have them all at your fingertips right away and not wait for
Yeah.
interlibrary loan because it's not valued
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah, I
So
follow you. I follow you. I think it's vital. I think it's really important, and I appreciate that you can recognize that in what I'm trying to do, because I think it is really vital and may they live on. I think the thing I've also come to, having been involved in management or like the organizational capacity of things,
mhm,
uh, some things do die and they give birth to something else after they die. But I
mhm,
think something can last and carry on and kind of hold down the fort around things a bit. It's so much better, that is a possibility rather than it always be like rise and collapse and
mhm.
then takes a lot of effort to especially with something like what you've done, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Having a space, having a collection that is understood, that it can grow, that it can be utilized, you know what I mean? All of those things. That's what dreams are made of, at least for my little dorky dreams as a child, you know, that is like the dreams as that library, you know what I mean? How
Yeah,
is it's like a glorious dream that I see, you know, that is real.
it's yours. It's everybody's when they need it, you know? That's why it's, you know, you come here and you research and you can use it and it exists, you know? It's
Yeah,
here
well,
to
let's
be.
do some messing about with astral magic at CAELi
Yes.
Institute.
Would love
I would
to. I would love to. Okay. Well, thank you for spending time fleshing out your work with astral magic and Astro Magia and I am and all of the wonderful things you're creating and building for the future and the unborn ancestors and all of this. So, yeah.
yeah. May they like it, I mean.
Well, this video will be on YouTube in perpetuity if that lasts for all time for them to go
Yeah,
back and be like, "Hey, remember when they were talking?" And, you know, in 120
yeah,
years
and
or 300
if
years.
anyone watching before November 16th, when the conference will happen this year or is with us now, you know, we'll share a promo code with you, Jen, that you can pop under the video or maybe share with people that have attended if
Mhm.
they would like to attend and don't yet have a ticket, okay?
Awesome. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, well, it's
Okay.
important.
It
Thanks so much
is.
again.
Thank you. I'll see you at the conference.
Alright, bye now.